Rose. Today we're going to be working on lesson 6. We will be doing some problem solving, which requires us to examine the word problems and following some steps. So go ahead and get ready with your book and open up to chapter and lesson 6.10. So lesson 6.10 is on page 291. Again, 6.10 is on page 291. And we're looking at problem solving. We will continue practicing addition and subtraction of fractions, but now we're also going to be problem solving. So we're going to write our objective here. Let's pick a different color. And so the objective is we will solve problems using the strategy work backward. So that gives us a huge hint, right, about today's problems. We will be working backwards. In other words, starting from the end, going back to the beginning. We'll see how that looks like or what that means. So let's go ahead and unlock the problem. The Diaz family is cross-country skiing the big 3 trails. Ooh, let us know right now too. Which have a total length of 4 miles. Yesterday, they skied the 7/10 mile Oak Trail. Today, they skied the 3/5 mile Pine Trail. If they plan to ski all of the big trails, how many more miles do they have left to ski? So we're going to go ahead and and we're going to read it again. And we're going to be circling or underlining important information. So let's read it again. The Diaz family is cross-country skiing the big 3 trails, which have a total length. So the total length of this big 3 trails is 4 miles. So if you wanted to ski all of them, all of it is 4 miles. And then it says how much the Diaz family skied yesterday. Yesterday they skied 7/10 of a mile. So not even 1 mile, right? Just 7/10. Today they skied 3/5 of a mile. So now the question is, if they plan to ski all of the big 3 trails, which is 4 miles, how many more miles do they have left to ski? So we want to find out how much more do they have to go. So we're going to use the graphic organizer to solve the problem. And so we're going to start off with, what do I need to find? We always start with that question, always. Even when I tell you to underline, I'm telling you, underline the question, right? So what do I need to find? Well, let's go back to the question is, how many more miles do they have left to ski? So they need to find the distance they have left to ski, right? Because that's what the question is. How many more miles do they have left to ski? So I need to find the distance they have left to ski. How many more miles do they need to ski if they already did 7/10 and 3/5? So now we're going to go ahead and look at the next part. What information do I need to use? Remember to pause your video if you need more time to write, or on the sections to write, just pause it so that you can write it down in your book. What information do I need to use? I need to use the distance. So we have 2 distances, right? And that's basically what we're using. I need to use the distance they have already skied and the total distance they plan to ski, which is 4 miles, right? They plan to, so they already skied 7/10, 3/5 of a mile. They want to ski for 4 miles. So now How are we going to use this information? And we're basically looking at the objective for the hint, right? We want to use the strategy work backward. Let's fill in the blanks. I can work backward by starting with so to start backwards, I'm basically starting with the total distance, right? So I'm going to start with the total distance. And so would I be subtracting or adding each distance they already skied? I will be subtracting, right? So I'm going to subtract and subtract each distance they have already skied to find the amount they have left. All right. So now it's time to solve the problem. Um, Here they're giving us addition and subtraction are inverse operations. Remember, inverse operations is a keyword. It's what it means. It's that they are opposites, like multiplication and division are inverse. Um, Division undoes multiplication. Multiplication undoes division. It's the same thing with addition and subtraction. You can add, and subtraction is the inverse, is the opposite. So we have here our first step. Our first step is to write an equation. So we're going to start off. We know that the total distance is 4. And to write an equation of this scenario, we're going to start off by writing the miles skied yesterday. So we go back to the problem, which see that yesterday they skied 7/10 miles. So we're going to write here 7/10 because that's the miles that were skied yesterday. 7/10. And if we add 7/10 plus what was the miles skied today, which it says today they skied the 3/5 mile or 3/5 of a mile. So I'm going to write here 3/5. And then if I add the miles they need to ski, so the leftover miles, I would get the total distance. So this equation represents the scenario, and I'm trying to find m, the miles they need to ski. Now we're going to work backwards to find m. So what I'm going to do is the inverse operation of addition. Now I'm gonna subtract from the 4 the miles they skied yesterday and today in order to figure out what is m. Okay, so I'm gonna start off by having a 4 here, and I will be subtracting 7/10 and subtracting 3/5 in order to get m. So what we're going to do now, okay, now that we know this is what we need to solve, 4 minus 7/10 minus 3/5 equals m. How are we going to solve this? Well, it is best if we write everything with the same denominator. And so I can tell here, my 4 is a whole number. So I can convert it into a any denominator by just using the renaming strategy, which we learned in lesson 8. But here we already have two fractions. One has a 10 as a denominator, and the other one has a 5. So I know that 10 would be my common denominator. But if you're still struggling, you write the multiples of 5, and you see that it's 5, 10, and that matches to the other denominator. So I'm going to use 10 as my common denominator and rewrite this. So I'm going to write the equivalent fractions of 4, 7/10, and 3/5 using 10 as a denominator. Now, how do I rewrite 4 so that I have a fraction? Well, remember, we're using 10 as a denominator. So if I am renaming it, I'm going to take one whole from the 4. I only need one whole from the 4. And I'm going to rewrite it as a fraction. So that 1 that I'm going to take away from the 4, I'm going to rewrite as a fraction. Remember that 1 is equal to the same So if I'm using 10 as a denominator, it'll be 10 over 10. Okay, it's the same number in the numerator and denominator. So my 4 I will rewrite as 3 and 10 over 10. Oops. So 3 and 10 over 10 is the same as 4 because I have a 3 whole number and 10 over 10 is equal to 1. So 3 plus 1 is 4. That's why it's the same thing. And we're going to subtract 7/10 is already has a 10 in its denominator. And now we're going to subtract 3/5. So we need to find the equivalent fraction of 3/5. And so we know that our denominator needs to be 10. So I think 5 times what number equals 10? So what I need to find what number I multiply the 5 to get 10. So I know that it's 2, right? 5 times 2 is 10. So now I'm going to multiply the numerator. 3 times 2 is 6. So the equivalent fraction of 3/5 is 6/10. So I'm going to subtract 6/10. Okay, so and that will give me m. I'm going to move this to the side because it's what I use to find the equivalent fractions. So now I'm going to start by subtracting. I'm going to be solving one step at a time. So I'm going to subtract 3/10, 10 over 10 minus 7/10. So what I'm going to do, I know that, well, 3 is going to stay the same unless I have to regroup. But I have 10 minus 7/10, which is 3, right? You just subtract the numerator. 10 minus 7 is 3. And the denominator always stays the same. Okay, I'm going to do that. Okay, so that was equal to 3 and 3/10. And then I will subtract 6/10. Now here's where we need to make an adjustment. Because in order to subtract 6/10 from 3/10, I need 3/10 is small. I cannot subtract 6 from 3. So I'm going to have to rename it again. What does that mean? That I'm going to have to borrow 1 from the 3, make it into a 2, and that whole I'm going to add it to the fraction, which is 10 over 10. I'm adding 10 over 10 to that fraction. Okay, so I will rewrite this as 2 and the fraction will be 3 plus 10, which is 13. I'm going to erase this and put it later. Or if I do, oops. Sorry. Okay. So I have 13 tenths, and I'm going to put the whole number here. So I have 2 and 13 tenths. Why do I have 2 and 13 tenths? Because I had to rename. So it comes from here. Okay, 2 and 13 because I added a whole number to the fraction. And I'm going to subtract 6/10. So now I can subtract from 13 because I renamed. I took a whole number and added that whole number to the fraction. So 13, so I'm going to carry over the whole number. 13 minus 6 is 7, right? Well, I'll put it later. 7, and that's over 10. We always keep the same denominator. Remember that when you add, you do not subtract or add the denominator. So 13 minus 6 was 7, and carry over the 10, so that's 2 and 7/10. So that means that m is equal to 2 and 7/10. So the family still has to ski for 2 and 7/10. Oops. 2 and 7/10 of a mile in order to finish. And that's a very long way, right? So it definitely is going to take more than a day, probably a few days. Okay, great. So I want you to make an attempt to do the next problem on the next page, which says, try another problem. I want you to try it. You're basically not really learning a new skill. This is just practicing addition and subtraction. But now we're incorporating a word problem. So that you need to make sense of the problem. Follow the questions, answer the questions. Um, and then we will go over this in class. Okay? Because the other problems we will have for homework as well later on. So go ahead and try the problem on 292. On the next slide, I will ask you to input, or I'm going to ask you questions about this, okay? So make sure you do it, take your time, and then answer the questions on the paradigm.